Hello, I'm Dennis Scully from Business of Home. We're going to start things off by sharing a package from our showroom sponsor, Theodore Alexander. We'll be back right after this word.
Inspired by the golden age of French decorative art, the Tavel collection portrays the late 18th century as seen from the perspective of King Gustav of Sweden and the craftsmen of the provinces. Highly individualized design treatments, informal woods, and casual finishes depict a tranquil elegance, eliciting an unassuming mood that blends to perfection. Designed for decorating today's homes, the Tavel collection's palette of gray, soft blue, and chalky white paint, along with the Avesta wood finish, will harmonize in the home.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Theodore Alexander, for being our showroom sponsor and for having us and ADAC. We're thrilled to be here. I'm Dennis Scully. I'm the host of the Business of Home podcast, and with me is my colleague and actually executive producer of the Business of Home podcast, Fred Nicholas.
Hi, Dennis.
Hi, Fred. So nice to almost be with you.
Yes, you're looking very dapper and literary with the background there. Not quite as literary as me, but
Yeah, you're one-upping me on the books. That's so you too.
These are all fake. So
I know that's not true. So we're going to talk today about our Future of Home conference, which we just wrapped up and put another one in the can. Our second annual Future of Home conference, for those of you that haven't had the thrill, nay, delight of attending the Future of Home, it's our second annual. It's a conference where we bring leading thinkers together to talk about a whole range of issues that are important to the interior design community and important to the home industry in general. And this year we turned it into a talk show, really, wouldn't you say?
it was a talk show, and you were the capable host.
I was the host, and it was a really wonderful show. We talked about a wide range of topics affecting the industry and affecting our world these days. What do you think is the best way to sort of kick things off, Fred, to talk about some of our topics?
Yeah, well, what we're going to do is we're going to play a few videos from the conference, and we can watch them, and then Dennis and I are going to talk about our thoughts and observations. And if you guys have questions, just use the Q&A function, and we'll try and answer them as we come and multitask. I thought we'd start off with Alain Sylvan, or Alain Sylvan, as you put it so fluently.
Oui, alors.
Yeah, he's the founder and CEO of this thing called Sylvan Labs, which is a strategy and design consultancy, and they've worked with everybody. I mean, if you look at their website, it's like IKEA, Chanel, BlackRock, Amazon. And he had this really sort of inspiring keynote speech about how we kind of need to make the best of what has been a challenging year to say the least.
For people. Sure.
Yeah, Rob, can we cue up the Alain clip?
So here we are in 2020, facing crisis after crisis after crisis. And while our clients are asking what the new normal should be, I can't help but think that that's just passively waiting for change, when this is a time when we should be proactively pushing for progress. What can we learn from Viktor Frankl? What can we learn from Richard Dupree and Procter & Gamble? What can we learn from the story of hip hop? How do we proactively push for progress?
How do we proactively push for progress? So what do you think?
Well, I've been doing push-ups here and there, so that's step one. No, but I love the talk because it was really, it was a pep talk really, because I think everybody over the past, 7 months has had such a hard time of things, and it's really easy to get sort of stunned by all the change that's going on and sort of forget that most great innovations happen during chaotic times. There's other examples from the presentation. He was talking about how, I think it was sort of a small funny example, but soap operas were invented during the Great Depression because Procter and Gamble was trying to figure out how to get the word out about their soap, and they realized that radio was this cool new technology they could use to do it. So that led to the invention of soap operas. He also had this really cool study which was talking about how it was done by the Harvard Business Review, about how companies during a recession or a difficult time that go on the offensive and spend more and try to develop more actually end up outlasting it and doing a lot better in the long run than companies that go on the defensive. There was that example with Sony and Apple, where I think it was during the recession or the internet boom where Sony really kind of pulled back, whereas Apple really pushed forward. And we all know how that one turned out. What were some of your takeaways?
Exactly. Picking up on that thread, there's always the temptation to retrench during these times. And there's also, and he pointed out, there's also the temptation to sort of stand back and watch how others respond. And he points out that that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. And so often in studies, you hear about companies that cut back on their marketing or cut back on their visibility during this time. And he cited several examples of companies that really took a leadership position immediately following a crisis because of the aggressive stance that they took. And they whether it was channeling their money into research and development, whether they were working on new products, or whether they found other ways to sort of keep their teams motivated and themselves positive. I thought it was such a strong, positive message about, we've been here before, we've been through crises, we've been through world wars, we'll get through this, and chances are we'll come out the other side with a future that hopefully we'll have helped to build rather than one that we're reacting to.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to play favorites here, but have you seen anything in the industry that sort of exemplifies that kind of thinking, like anything that's jumped out at you over the past few months?
Well, I mean, you and I actually talk about this often. I'm impressed with the companies that are using this time to work on their e-commerce sites. I'm impressed with the companies that are really taking a broad look at their entire operation and seeing how can they learn to better communicate with clients during this time. How I find a lot of companies are discovering that the opportunity of meeting with people on Zoom in the way we are now is a really great way to start communicating in general. And so I love hearing from companies about things that they're thinking they're forever going to incorporate into how they do business going forward coming out of this time. What about you?
Yeah, well, it's tough because when you're looking back, like Sony and Apple, you're like, oh, well, Apple did great 10 years later. Right now, it's really hard to know, who's making the changes that are going to redefine the industry. But I've been really encouraged just by all the experimentation, like interior designers who would never have considered doing like e-design or remote consultations are, have been doing it in droves. And it's really, I think a lot of them will keep doing it even after things get back to normal, because it's like, I think a lot of people were intimidated or sort of saw it as déclassé. But, if you do a FaceTime consultation with a client, it's an hour long, you make X hundreds of dollars. Most designers can fit that into their schedule. Most designers can see it as a way to connect with new audiences. And I think stuff like that is going to keep going even after we get back to, whatever the next normal is. So yeah, I don't know exactly how it will all happen because we're in the moment right now, but I do think people trying new stuff has been a really sort of inspiring small silver lining of a weird time.
Yeah, I agree. And you and I have spoken to many designers who felt in an odd way fortunate to have gone through the financial crisis of 10 years ago and came into this time in a way so much better prepared. Because while they didn't have a pandemic playbook, they certainly had a pullback and a pause playbook, and they sort of knew how to position themselves. Now, interestingly, we found that many designers are hardly on pause. That perhaps they've never been busier,
Yeah.
and that's another sort of interesting challenge in this time.
Yeah, right, exactly. How do you capture all the new business that's coming in during a very, very, very weird time? And I'm really interested. I'm interested to cover it right now for Business of Home in the moment, but I'm dying to look back in 5 years and see, oh, these were the firms that really figured out how to make this time work from them. Do you want to move on to the next video? I think we should talk about Christiane Lemieux. So I think probably Christiane will be familiar to a lot of people watching this. She's sort of it's hard to put a label on her because she does so many things.
Her.
I've written serial entrepreneur. I think that kind of covers it. She founded Cloth and Company, or at least helped found it, 12 Studio, The Inside. She recently has released a furniture collection with Anthropologie under the name Lemieux SE. And she's also a writer. She writes for Architectural Digest, and, among other places. And she recently wrote this book called Frictionless, which is about how she sees the business world evolving over the next few years. So Rob, can you cue up the Christiane video?
What I learned, and I think we all know this intuitively, but what I learned is sort of the frictionless transaction of anything, whether it's home furnishings or healthcare or renewing your driver's license now. I mean, all of it is easier. The less friction there is, the more your customer will come back and work with you. I mean, to the point where I am sure you have your 5 favorite apps, places, whatever, for the things that you do the most, and you go back to them on a near constant basis because it's frictionless for you, right? It's 1, 2, 3, and it's done, whether it's Seamless or Amazon. And that kind of ecosystem that allows people to do what they want to do in a very quick and efficient way gives them back personal time. And so what we're seeing, the seismic shift here is that the things that used to take us 3 hours can now take us 1 to 2 minutes. And the more you do that frictionlessly, and the more you help people kind of regain this digital time, this found time, the more they will love you. And if you do the opposite in any way, if you throw up roadblocks, if you make it difficult, they will go, and they will go for good. Because the other thing about e-commerce and the digital landscape now is that, generally speaking, there are 1, 3, 5 at least competitors to any kind of business idea. I mean, even Amazon has its competitors. They aren't necessarily doing as well because they're not as frictionless, but it's out there.
So yeah, that was sort of the nugget of Christiane's talk. The two of you talked a lot about what sort of frictionlessness sort of means in a few examples, but it's kind of interesting because on some level, the book and the idea is sort of nothing new. It's not like 10 years ago, everyone was like, how can we get some more friction? And we need to gum up the work for people. Yeah, we need to gum up our works because that's what's great right now.
Yeah.
But I think what's sort of new and interesting about it is this idea that, contemporary consumers, whether they're millennials or Gen Z or, babies or whatever, are just, it's not so impatient, it's that they just will not stand on any level for experience as friction in it. Which I thought was kind of, what were your takeaways from it?
Yeah, I mean,
Dennis, can you hear me?
I certainly can. Can you hear me? I think that Christiane and I talked a little bit about the fact that in the home industry, we are often challenged by this issue, that we sometimes have an industry that is littered with friction. Sometimes our ordering process or our quote process isn't as easy as we would like it to be. And I think that the overarching message was that as more and more people are spending time online, especially on sites that are making it very easy for you to transact, they want that in all of their experiences. And so what can we do as an industry? And I think of showrooms specifically in this case, and here we are at ADAC, and so I've got my showroom hat on and thinking, what can I do to make every part of the process easier for that designer, particularly someone who's making the effort to come to a showroom and to work with a salesperson and to be given a quote and to be able to follow up on an order. What are all the steps in that process that we can make easier for designers? And that, I think, was a big part of the message, and is forever a challenge for our industry.
Do you think that's kind of always been true? Is this like a generational thing? Like, why is that especially true now? Is it just because young designers are raised on shopping on Amazon and they're not used to having to like fill out 5 forms and using a fax to order one thing? Is that
Right.
basically what we're talking about?
Right. Well, I mean, exactly. And so we, first of all, do they even know about faxes? But most
Right.
most showrooms at ADEC, I assure you, have the fax machine, and still are getting POs that way. So I mean, has it been forever thus? Absolutely. And we've gotten better, and hopefully we are continuing to get better. But it's always been a multi-step process, and where we can hopefully start to move forward with some of this is just looking at taking some of those steps out of the process. And it's complicated for multi-line showrooms who have a lot of different vendors and who have to work with everyone else's technology. But designers, particularly young designers, to your point, are making it very clear they want to be able to order on their phone. They want to be able to look at things at night when the showroom isn't open. They want answers to questions all the time. And all of those are elements of what we need to continue to work on to make our industry more frictionless.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's funny, but the interior design industry is almost built on a kind of friction on some level, because I think trade exclusivity kind of like, it's just fundamentally putting up a roadblock, and then the roadblock exists for a good reason, but it's like, you got to jump over this thing if you want to shop with us. And so I think there's always been this incentive for trade brands to be like, we need to put up a barrier or some kind of friction. Otherwise, we're going to have everybody off the street ordering like 100 samples and wasting all our time, when really we want to be talking to like, 6 people, or 60 people, let's say.
Yeah.
So I think it's tough for a lot of brands because they look at this idea of like, okay, yeah, we have to have like an Amazon, like, e-commerce experience, which is incredibly expensive and hard to pull off, for one.
Right.
But then they're also like, well, we only really need to do business with a relatively small number of people. It was funny when I was thinking about this topic, and Christian brought up the example of Seamless, which is an app that basically could be called frictionless. The idea is, you hit 3 buttons on your phone, 20 minutes later, Chinese food arrives at your door, which is great, and I think most people use it. But then you look at like the experience of getting a reservation at like the best restaurant in town, which is not seamless, as anyone who has tried to do it in whatever city will experience. And I think that it's like experiences and goods and products that are exclusive have a kind of inherent friction to them. And I'm sort of interested in like the tension between that. Like, is it always a good thing to make it incredibly easy for people to buy your product? Or is it in some cases kind of cool to put some walls around it to make people jump over so they feel special having gotten there,
Yeah, I mean, it's this fine line often between exclusivity and good service. And I think many in the industry, I know David Sutherland has talked about this, that perhaps we did ourselves a disservice over the years by being too mysterious or too hidden. And your friend Gary Friedman from RH always talks about our industry being behind this iron curtain. Yeah. And so he's trying to sort of leapfrog and get out in front and say, well, we've got our own interior designers and we've got our own set of product, and you don't have to worry about that complicated process over there in some design center where they're not going to make you feel welcome. And I think that we did do ourselves a disservice years ago, perhaps, but we have to use this time to come at people where they are, I think, and what people are telling us more and more, as you were saying, the industry can't be seamless. the industry can't be your fresh direct grocery service, though I wish it could, because that's actually my favorite service in the world. But what can we learn from any of those, and what can we deliver more easily to designers, and recognize that they want some of their time back, which was a big part of Christiane's message. Give people time back and they will come back to you.
No, that's such a great point. And one more thing that I think we should move on, but I think what's interesting is, this is, lots of brands are already trying to do this. And I think there's a tendency to think, okay, it's got to be a frictionless experience. That means we have to automate everything. We have to make it so that you can order, a custom sofa at 2 a.m. in Shanghai, and it'll, but I think that like some brands, when they look at wanting to be more frictionless, they realize that you just have, like, having a person there and having a lot of people is actually more effective than trying to automate it all. Like, there's this brand called Roger and Chris. I'm not sure if they're really that well known in the design industry, but they make custom sofas. And I was interviewing them for some story or another, and I was like, well, wouldn't it be better if you automated this so customers never had to talk to you to order it? And they were like, well, actually, it's much easier if we just talk to them on the phone for 20 minutes. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to remember that frictionless doesn't necessarily mean that everything is a drop-down menu on a website. It's looking at your processes with, a real hard eye and making it easier on people, as you said, and saving them time.
Absolutely. And to your point, and you and I were discussing this just yesterday, that imagine humans can play a huge role, and often they do, and humans can provide incredible service, and a good showroom can provide incredible service and inspire and delight and be a huge part of what people enjoy about the process. But it's just, everything's got to just be a little bit easier.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next speaker, Kia Weatherspoon, who's the founder of this design firm called Determined by Design. She focuses on multifamily, affordable, and supportive housing properties, boutique hotels, and small businesses in economically challenged and emerging communities. Basically, her mission is to bring great design to everyone, people who haven't had it before and are looking for it. Can we play the clip there up, Kia?
Presentation where you showed the audience different rooms, and you asked them, who is this space for? Tell me a little bit about that.
So it was called a presentation, Design Without Labels, right? So we show them a community room in an affordable housing project. Then we show them this kind of elevated interiors of a common area. Then we show them what looked like could be a transitional lobby outside of a conference room. So I'm asking these designers and architects, which space is for who? The pretty spaces were for luxury, high-end residential. The ugly spaces were for like low income or support services. And then I surprised them all and said, well, actually, the elevated spaces were for affordable housing. And that was our work. You should not be able to tell the difference between a design. It should be equal across the board, no matter who the end users, what their demographics or their socioeconomic background. And I think as designers, if we are constantly labeling what someone deserves, that limits the design outcome that you provide as a designer. And you have to get that out of your psyche in order to do better for all people.
Yeah, that was just a really great, inspiring talk. It was funny, we were talking about making clips to pull out of that, and there are just so many we could have pulled out. Kia has this really inspiring story about, she was deployed overseas in the Middle East, and she was in a tent with a bunch of other women, and she was having sort of a difficult time, and so she created like an area of the tent where she was like on her own, where she could really have the emotions she needed to have. And that was like when she realized, like, oh, I want to create space that elicits an emotional reaction. That was when she knew she wanted to be an interior designer. And I think she brings that sort of empathetic, feelings-focused approach to what she does. What were some of your takeaways? What did you like about it?
Yeah, I mean, that was such a powerful story, and she's such a powerful speaker, and it was so interesting to see the sort of chat board that ran alongside the Future of Home presentation, just light up with people responding and connecting with her in such a powerful way. And her message is, why on earth would you think that people that are living in an affordable housing project deserve anything less than the level of design that you would bring to any other project? And she also talks about the power of design to heal, and that so many of us come to design with a need to be healed. And she spoke about that very intimately and very personally, telling her story of being stationed in the Middle East and literally just needing to hang some sheets to build a space where she could just let herself go for a little bit. And Kia's last name is Weatherspoon, Kia Weatherspoon. There's an example of us just answering questions on the fly right there. You know, feel free, write in questions, come in and chat. We can just, boom, we can knock them right out. See how easy that was? Look at that. But hers is such a powerful message for this industry about, as I was just sort of saying, never losing sight of the power of design to heal, and recognize that everyone needs to benefit from that.
Yeah, and it was really interesting to hear how sort of that inequity is so baked into the process. You know, she was talking about, you know, when these affordable housing projects go up, you know, they're done by developers, usually on some level contracting with various local governments. And she said that 9 times out of 10, when she's talking to the developers and contractors who put these projects together, they don't even think about using an interior design firm, not even as a consultant to spend like 3 hours, you know what I mean? And so it's such a big problem, because these people need to be made aware of the power of design, because they're thinking about it sort of just functionally. And it's also just, you know, there's all kinds of weird little things. Like, remember the bit about the cabinets where she was saying that in public housing units, like, they're using the same cabinetry that they've spec'd for 50 years. It's probably some company in, you know, somewhere that still exists just to, you know, deliver this overpriced, clunky, horrible cabinetry to affordable housing. And you really realize how the system is kind of set up not to deliver great design to everybody, which is unfortunate.
Exactly. And luckily, she feels very energized by the young designers that she sees coming up in the world today, that want to make a difference and want to be doing design that makes an impact. And I think that she speaks so personally about that impact and what it can be. And I think she gave sort of a reassuring message about the future. But as you and I know, lots of barriers and boundaries to be knocked down in order to bring that collectively to everyone. But that was her message, that good design ought to be for everyone, and we certainly feel that way.
Yeah, she had that great quote about how interior design is empathy in practice, and I think that's a really helpful way to frame it. And it makes the inequity more clear, because nobody is like on a regular, residential interior design project. You'd never think twice about talking about, is this sofa comfortable to sit in? Can I bring my mother-in-law here? Like, all that stuff is just part of the discourse. But she was saying that when she goes into these spaces, people just don't think like that. They don't talk like that. The conversation is about, well, how, we've got to use this because it's going to be used by 500 people. It's got to last, it's got to be economical. And, of course, budget is always going to be an issue, but just having that sort of mental flip of thinking about it like, no, this is a space that real people will live in, and they're just as human as the people who, live on Park Avenue. And we need to think about that. It's a small thing, but it's a pretty revolutionary way to think about it. And just to echo what you were saying about students, I really think that's true, that the rising generation of design students really care about having an impact beyond just making a pretty space. I was speaking with this professor, Judith Gura, who sadly passed away at the New York School of Interior Design. And she was saying that she's blown away, because it used to be that people would talk about interior design, they wanted have the house better than the person down the block, and that drove so much of design for the 20th century. but you're saying that all new students now want their work to have some kind of impact. So that's I do think the winds of change are blowing.
Well, and speaking of empathy, you know, it made me think of one of our speakers at last year's Future of Home conference who spoke on empathy, and in a very similar way told this story about being tasked with the project of redesigning the examination rooms where women would come in for a mammogram, and
Right.
and discovered how sort of cold and impersonal these rooms were, and how cold the equipment was, and sort of how unwelcoming the space was. And at a time and a place where you're coming for this examination, and you're nervous and you're anxious, and you're going through a whole host of different emotions, particularly if you're in any way concerned about the results. And he talked about just completely redesigning the space from the perspective of how can we take care of the person coming into this space. And she talked about that so much too. She talked about, well, would you just want this folding table and these chairs for your kid's 6th birthday party? No, of course not. You'd want this fabulous playroom for your child's 6th birthday party. And so why should we make this playroom in an affordable housing project any less than what you would want yourself? And so many designers chimed in and just, again, related and responded so well to that. And so I hope that people will really take to heart a lot of what she said, because she delivered a very powerful message for the industry. And if you have a chance to go back and rewatch her, the clips of the Future of Home are up on our site, and I would certainly encourage taking them all in. But Kia is particularly moving.
Yeah, you can get there via businessofhome.com or futureofhome.com. So just a little plug. So let's move on to Russ Mashmeyer. So Russ is the founder of this app called Primer, which is an AR, which means augmented reality app, that allows its users to sort of try out various things, wallpaper, paint, fabrics in their homes using an app on a smartphone. Let's cue up the Russ clip and have him explain it.
When we started Primer, we asked ourselves a question. With all of these amazing technologies available, why is it still so hard to visualize changes to your space? Why are we still ordering tiny samples and painting swatches on our walls, when what we really want is to try things out in our space at full scale? We heard from our friends and our early users over and over that being able to visualize an idea directly in your space unlocks the confidence to make it real. A few large retailers like IKEA saw the promise of augmented reality early on and launched their own app experiences. That foresight will pay off. In 5 to 10 years, customers will simply expect augmented reality tools when shopping online. And the brands that move quickly now will benefit the most.
So that was Russ there, sort of channeling Steve Jobs with the presentation and the black turtle. I should have worn my black turtleneck for today, because I've got the Steve Jobs glasses. That was a very small part of a very sort of complicated and really interesting presentation about really big picture, what are the technologies that are going to change the design industry. And I think it's interesting that the talk is complicated and the technology is sort of complicated. And I think a lot of people, when they hear this stuff like photogrammetry and computer vision and augmented reality, your brain turns off a little bit, or there's a tendency to think, well, that doesn't really matter. Like, that doesn't really apply to me. Like, my clients don't care about that stuff. But I think over time, a lot of these technologies will become a more regular day-to-day part of our industry. Do you want to, Dennis, kind of just run through what they are? I can sort of briefly explain the 3 things he was talking about. Maybe that's a helpful way to start.
Well, I mean, start with photogrammetry. I mean, because that's a really powerful tool that's come a long way.
Right, gotcha. I like how, Fred, you start with photogrammetry.
Fred, why don't you tell people what photogrammetry is?
Well, I do have a PhD in photogrammetry. I'm actually very proud that I'm even able to pronounce it. What it is a technology basically that allows you with, right now, a very specialized camera, where you can basically put a camera in your room and take pictures of it, and you get a really perfectly rendered 3D model of that room. And when I say perfect, I mean it really does look like a photograph of the room. And I think what's interesting about that is that right now you do have to have a sort of high, a complicated, expensive camera. But Apple is adding this thing called a LiDAR sensor to their iPhone. So pretty soon you'll be able to do some version of that with your phone. And when I say pretty soon, I mean like in 6 months, not like 10 years. And so what that will do basically is that you can go to a client's home or you can go to a prospective job, and rather than kind of sketching it or taking a bunch of iPhone pictures and trying to remember like which wall is facing south and all that, you can just hold up your phone or whatever it is, and you'll have like this really wonderfully rendered 3D model of the space down to the inch of measurement. So it's not just a picture. It's like you can use it for a schematic, which is a really powerful tool. And the funny thing is, there are people who are doing this already. Like Modsy, the e-design company, has basically a photogrammetry function within their app that allows you to. I did it. You basically walk around your room. So it's sort of goofy, but you walk around your room holding your phone, and they send you back a 3D model of your room, and it's really not. It's darn impressive. So that's gonna sort of change the industry. What were some of your thoughts about that technology in particular? Like, how do you see that being used?
Well, and so I too have used Modsy and written about Modsy, and it's interesting because they were at our last year's Future of Home conference, right. and at the time, many designers sort of came up to me expressing that they were quite nervous to see this technology and thought that it was going to displace interior designers. And Russ makes such a point of talking about these tools being just that, tools for designers, and that you and I talk to so many designers that wish they had more time back to actually work on interior design versus all of the other things that they have to do to actually run an interior design firm. And Russ's point was, this is perhaps one of the tools, and there were a series of them that might do just that, give you back some time and perhaps free your imagination even further to perhaps take some greater risks, to be bolder in your projects, but that these tools are really there to serve the interior designer, not to replace the interior designer.
I'm a little bit more cynical about that.
What's on the other side of this issue? Go ahead, Fred.
Well, it's not that I think that these things aren't tools and won't be tools for designers, but I do really think there is a danger for these kinds of technologies to replace a certain kind of design or a certain kind of designer. Because, I've seen some of this technology. It's impressive. You can basically take a picture of your room. It takes almost no time. You send it off somewhere and something comes back, and it's like a not unreasonable design. And yes, that design is done by a frankly underpaid interior designer.
Precisely.
But I do think that over time, more and more of it will be accomplished by machine learning, where basically computers, generate all these images. People say, yes, that's good, that's glam, that's deco, that's good. And the computer can still start to replicate that. Yeah. And so I think that what it will change is that designers are going to need to focus less on, I'm going to present a beautiful rendering to the client, or I'm going to present it'll be less about taste and more about, I can make this project go incredibly smoothly, thereby giving you back more time. I'm a really wonderful person to work with, so you'll enjoy the process as opposed to dreading it. And like, I can yell at the painter, the app can't yell at the painter. So I do think it will change the industry, and I think it will make designers focus on a different part of their value proposition to the client. And so I think it honestly will put some people out of business, but not the good ones. Go on.
Well, and I mean, there was so many of these technologies, honestly, will have an impact on people that serve the design industry as well. Yeah. And that's also part of the challenge. But let's talk about some of the other things that Russ talked about. Well,
there are two other technologies that he talked about really changing the industry. One of them is computer vision. And basically what that means is, let's say you've taken your photogrammetry image, or really any image, a computer now can go through and identify, well, okay, that's a chair, that's a table, that's a fireplace. And this stuff works already. This is not like, you know, I think he had an example of how like a computer could tell like which Beatle was which in a video.
Which one was Paul and which one was John?
I knew we wouldn't get through this to that one English accent there. So you know, that one was a little bit less clear to me how that would affect designers, but certainly for brands, you know, it'll make it a lot more easier to sort through stuff like Pinterest. And what were your thoughts on how computer vision is going to change the industry, if at all?
Well, I mean, it certainly seemed that the learning aspect of computer vision is fascinating, and the ability to quickly learn to identify not just John and Paul, but many other images around the room very, very quickly. And I thought the idea that it could tell if you were looking at the wall and it could quickly show you some artwork, it could tell if you were looking at the floor and it could show you some rugs or some plants. There just seemed, as you and I know, so many companies right now are just trying to bring in more and more business so that their computer learning can have lots of new images and can learn quicker and quicker. And that's what we saw in that discussion, that is getting smarter by the second.
How would it actually be used though? That's the part I don't get. Like, I guess one thing you could do with it is that you could just scan Instagram and find out, like, you know, a designer posts a beautiful picture. It would be relatively easy because it'll go beyond, this is just a bed. It'll be able to say, oh, this is a Crate and Barrel bed, or this is whatever. So maybe, I don't know what impact that has on the industry, but that's one way it could be used, is you wouldn't have to ask about sourcing. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's one way it could be used. I think that kind of technology will be used more by brands and companies than by individual designers, would be my guess.
It definitely seemed like it was a consumer experience project rather than perhaps how designers will use it, but yeah.
And then the last thing, of course, is augmented reality, which is, I'm sure most people have seen it or heard about it or tried it kind of in some fashion, which is basically what you do. The simplest version is it's an app on your phone, you hold it up, so you're looking at whatever your camera is showing you, and the app puts in an image into the scene. I think a lot of the technology up until now has been sort of clunky. Like IKEA has one that's all right, but what it ends up sort of looking like is a little bit like you hold up your phone in an empty room and you're like, okay, like a cartoon chair would look like that over there, but obviously you're not going to buy a cartoon chair. I think the thing is, it's going to get a lot better, especially when 5G comes out. I don't know if people know about that, but that's a new connection standard, which basically is going to make everybody's phone incredibly fast. And so you won't be looking at a cartoon picture of an IKEA chair in your own room. You'll be looking at a photorealistic couch or anything, and you'll be able to see what it would look like in real time. So that one seems like has the potential to profoundly affect the way designers work. What were some of your thoughts?
Yeah, so part of that presentation is that Russ has developed an app called Primer, which is a stunning app that allows you to use AR technology to throw some CW Stockwell wallpaper up on your wall. I was staying with relatives over Labor Day weekend, and I threw some CW Stockwell wallpaper up in the guest room, and it looked fabulous. I hope they're going to buy that and install it for my next visit. But what was so powerful about that was, as Russ pointed out in his talk, is you don't want to just see the cartoon chair. You actually want to see a full-on installation of something, because so many of us have trouble visualizing, right? And so this tool and Modzy's tools as well really help you to see what that space can look like.
Yeah, no. And I think, you know, it's interesting. Designers already do that on some level, and that they'll have a renderer, a generator, they'll do it themselves. They'll generate a rendering of what they want the space to look like. And, you know, it's a very powerful tool. It was funny. I was talking to a designer recently, and she was like, yeah, usually, like, I don't want to be gendered about it, but usually the rendering gets the husband on board. Like, the husband needs to see it. So, you know, imagine if instead of, sending off to a renderer in Ukraine to generate a picture that you show to the clients at a meeting, you're just in the space, you're holding up your phone or your iPad, and you're like, okay, here's what I'm thinking for, this wall, this sconce. You just drag it on, and the clients can like walk around, and you can turn it on and off. I mean, that kind of thing is really going to change the way that designers pitch ideas to clients, share ideas with them. I think the interesting part about it is that there's another side of it, which is that brands have to provide these images. It's not, IKEA can do it because they have a huge budget to turn every single thing they do into a 3D model. But, not every trade-focused brand has this incredible budget for it. So what I think you're going to see over the next few years is a lot of companies coming out who want to provide that service of turning their collection into a 3D model for cheaper and cheaper. And I think you will see more and more people in our world start to invest in that kind of technology.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to be Pollyanna about it. This is coming, and this technology is going to be disruptive to some, no question. But it's also going to make designers' presentations far more powerful and compelling. And there are a lot of ways that these new technologies can become powerful tools, but for some, they will be disruptive. There's no question.
Yeah. Do you want to move? Oh, we have a question. Can you repeat a couple of the applications reality tools you mentioned? Well, the guy that you saw at the beginning was named Russ Mashmeyer, and his tool is called Primer. So that's a good one to start with because it's an augmented reality tool that allows you to you hold up a camera and you see your wall, and you can slide on a wallpaper or slide on a paint color and sort of see what it looks like in action. There's a lot of them, so it's hard to answer the question beyond that. But the technologies are photogrammetry, which is the thing of taking the 3D picture of your room. There's computer vision, which is identifying everything in the room automatically. And there's augmented reality, which is Primer. So let's move on to our last video.
Yeah, because I see we're getting tight on time here too.
We are, yes. Let's talk about circularity. Rob, can we get the circularity video?
Okay.
To your point, Nicole, why would circularity be a dream? What's the goal behind circularity, and why would that be an aspiration?
Yeah, so if you think about it, I mean, where we are in 2020 is sort of the culmination of the way the Industrial Revolution has occurred, right? We learned how to make things and at scale and like grow. And at the end of the day, all the things that we make, there isn't somewhere for them to go next, right? Like we essentially are creating things where the ultimate ending is going to be in the landfill. And so what circularity does is it brings this idea of like, let's create product from the beginning, thinking through its multiple lives and where it will go in the end.
So I should have set that up. That was Eileen Marcus, who did not speak, of Koyuchi, and Nicole Bassett of this thing called the Renewal Workshop. And basically what they've done is partnered to come out with a product that Koyuchi releases that is basically made of recycled blankets, essentially. So Koyuchi will sell a blanket, and then as part of the deal, customers will return it at the end of the life cycle when they're done with it, and Koyuchi will turn it into a new blanket, which is then bought by a new customer. And this bigger idea of creating a circular economy for as many things as we can is a really big part of the sort of the sustainability conversation. It's not just about recycling things or keeping things longer. It's about designing a product from the very beginning that you know is going to come back to you so that it doesn't end up in a landfill. And it's a very hot topic. When we were doing that during the conference, there were just tons of people going off in the chat about samples going to waste. Furniture accounts for some crazy percentage of the amount of stuff in a landfill. So it's a very important conversation and an interesting one. What were some of your takeaways, Dennis?
Yeah, I agree. And interestingly, just as Russ was wrapping up his talk, he actually pointed to the fact that with Primer, for example, being able through augmented reality to see some of these products in an installation, you were saving yourself from perhaps ordering a sample, and there were so many other steps that you didn't have to take, and those samples didn't end up in the landfill. And that was so much of the conversation with Nicole Bassett and Eileen Marcus was what we know that so many products lose their usefulness long before they're sort of really worn out, or maybe you lose interest in a product, as Koyuchi discovered with some of their bedding, that because it's organic cotton and really well made, it held up very well, but some people wanted to move on and get a different color or get a different pattern. And so people started bringing things back, and they turned that into a business where they developed a take back program, and they encouraged people to, and as we talked about at the conference, bedding might be one of those areas where maybe you're a little nervous about getting some used or renewed bedding. But they quickly said, well, you've stayed at hotels, you've stayed at Airbnbs, you've stayed at your grandma's house, and she's got, used bedding too. And so they sort of broke down some of those fears, but it's a really important conversation, and so many big corporations are stepping forward. Shortly after the conference, the partnership between Pottery Barn and the Renewal Workshop was announced, and that Pottery Barn and the Williams-Sonoma companies in general are very focused on what they can do to reduce the product that they know is ending up in the landfill. And anyone who's ever worked in a fabric showroom, as I have, can tell you there's a lot of fabric samples that are ending up, well, I'm not sure where, but hopefully not a landfill, but they're not ending up where they should. And if they can be renewed, if they can be recycled, then the world is going to benefit.
Right. Yeah, no, there's lots of companies that are, IKEA has a big initiative to push for circularity. We should also be, just to be totally clear, it's not like they take the blanket, put it through the wash, and then sell it again. They put it through a process. I think they break it down into pulp and renew it. They renew it, exactly. And so there's a lot of stuff like that out there. And I think it's really, really important because the interior design industry is based around new product. I mean, that's how designers make money for the most part. And so I think it's important for us not to pretend like, the industry is ever going to, move away from new product. That's not going to happen. So we need to let that go. Instead, focus on, well, how can we start from the beginning and think, okay, well, yes, my client is going to buy this, but it's not going to end up in a landfill. It's going to come back somewhere else. One thing that's so difficult about it, though, is that so many of these initiatives are kind of small. Like, there's great charities that do really interesting things with used samples. There's a company in LA that takes used fabric samples and makes new furniture and jackets and stuff, which is really cool. But the challenge with all this stuff is I feel like it has to come from the government, because otherwise what companies end up doing is they have to spend a lot of time and money investing in these complicated things, and they fall behind the competition who aren't doing it. And so, I was talking with Heath, the ceramics company in the Bay Area, and they have a zero waste program. And they were saying, yeah, this is great for this sort of San Francisco based company that sells expensive pottery, but until everybody has to do this, then it's gonna be a rarity. So I think the challenge is for everybody to think about incorporating it into their own practice, but also pushing up to try and make, the powers that be focus on it more as an issue. So we're getting to the end here. I'm curious, does anyone who's watching have any questions for us? I see we have one there. Dennis, you want to read that one?
If we go even further in the future, do you think some interior elements that are not tactile, walls, art, etc., maybe they can remain in augmented reality without having to actually be ordered and installed? That will make their replacement absolutely frictionless at the press of a button. All right, well, Anna, whoever you are doing a fantastic job of bringing these conversations together. So hats off to you. And Lisa D, whoever you are, thank you for those kind words in the chat. Very much appreciate that. I think a lot of these conversations, the tools, the circularity, I think they all had an underlying theme of all of us needing to be much more environmentally aware about the impact that our industry is making. And Fred was talking about Anna the architect in Atlanta. All right, well, thanks, Anna the architect. Fred was making the point about the landfills and furniture, and we know that, I mean, I was just talking to a designer the other day who was telling the story of the clients wanted to recover all the practically brand new furniture, and there you go. Or how often has the client moved into a new home and wants to rip out all the cabinets and do all these other things? So, I mean, it's a challenge with our industry, and Fred wrote a great piece about our industry's obsession with newness. And yes, there are lots of reasons why our industry wants to always show you something new to get your attention, to get you into the showroom, to have something new to talk about. But it doesn't mean that we want to just throw everything away that we made before. And that's our challenge, is having this conversation around what can we do to be better stewards of the environment and recognize the impact that our industry is making, because it is pretty substantial.
Yeah, I mean, Anna, just to dive in a little deeper there, I think it's tough, because at some point the client is going to want to sit on some furniture and not have it in augmented reality. But that's a really good point, because what you could do with some of this technology is you could walk the client through selecting everything they're going to select, and they could really literally just hold up a camera and go like, okay, it's going to look like that, it's going to look like that, and at some point that will be photorealistic. And so, as you point out, then that saves on all of the costs and all the hassle of getting that chair ordered, shipped, installed, and having the client make up their mind at the last minute that actually what they want is a totally different chair. And so, yeah, I think some of this technology, will change conversations like that. I don't think it's tomorrow or even next year, but I do think that these tools are not going to exist purely in some tech blog that you maybe read about and ignore. I think they will become a big part of our industry, and I think it's important that designers start looking at them now so they know what's coming down the pike.
Well, exactly. And if there was any sort of overarching message from the future of home, it was how accelerated the industry, everything has become accelerated. And so the penetration of augmented reality and the penetration of online sales, everything has been sped up in some cases by years. And so when Fred says these things are coming, they're coming very quickly, and they're coming soon, and new phones will have better tools, and 5G technology will make a whole host of new things possible. And so everyone should be looking at these technologies and thinking about these technologies and the impact that they're likely to have on your business. I know we have to wrap up, so I want to be sure to thank our showroom sponsor, Theodore Alexander, again, for having us, and ADAC for having us as well. And I want to thank all of you for joining us so much. And Fred, I mean, how great to get to spend this time with you. Thank you.
No, it was fun. And I want to remind people that they can check out more videos from the conference at futureofhome.com, also businessofhome.com. And if you enjoyed this conversation with the lovely Mr. Scully here, he has a podcast that I spend a lot of time working on as well. And it's which I do enjoy. So you can find that as well. Just Google Business of Home Podcasts, and you're going to get a lot more of that. Maybe minus the pocket square, but you'll get a lot more of the voice.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you, ADAC, and thank you, Theodore Alexander. We really appreciate it. We've been delighted to be here today.